At Ophelis Hall, Ziggs was in the middle of his usual workout when Taylee suddenly burst into his room. Out of breath, Taylee asked for his help. He needed Ziggs to come with him to rescue Ayla. Ed, meanwhile, already knew how things were supposed to unfold. Taylee would seek Ziggs's aid, then make his way through the underground waterways, passing 4 distinct areas before finally reaching the laboratory. Ed was familiar with the path, though he had never attempted it in reverse. Right now, he was in the Monster Research Lab, one of the most dangerous areas. Normally this place teemed with threats, but since he was moving backward through the route, none of the creatures had been awakened yet. He managed to slip through without incident. He needed to move quickly, but there was a problem. The guardian of the Soul Library, Raina, stood between him and the exit. Crouching low, Ed moved along the edges of the library, slipping behind desks as he tracked Raina's patrol routes. He knew them well, and he also knew how to defeat her if it came to a fight. Still, he wanted to avoid conflict. Raina was an important obstacle meant for Taylee's growth. Among the mini-bosses of this stage, both Raina and the Devil revived in the waterways would give Taylee crucial experience. For that reason, Ed wanted to bypass her while collecting the magical items he needed along the way. Glancing over his list, he frowned at how many valuable artifacts he would have to leave behind for now. He decided he could come back later once Taylee defeated Raina. Muggs whispered that Raina had moved away, and the path to the exit was clear. Ed rose and hurried forward, but before he could escape, the ground shuddered with a violent tremor. A distant explosion boomed through the halls. He froze. An earthquake? That wasn't something he remembered from the game. The bookshelf beside him toppled over with a crash, leaving him exposed. Raina turned toward him, her ghostly form gliding forward. The pale woman let out a piercing scream as her gaze locked on Ed. 30 minutes earlier, the battle in Trix Hall raged on after the sealed tome had been stolen. Lortel pulled a staff member out of danger, saving them from a rampaging spirit conjured by Professor Glass. She muttered that even with all the secrecy around the transaction, she could hardly believe the tome had truly been taken. The headmaster reassured her that he would take full responsibility. He promised he would reclaim the tome himself, then asked her to stay and help suppress Glass' rebellion. After a pause, he asked if she was familiar with the 3 forbidden acts. They were the laws of nature no one dared to twist. The pursuit of immortality. Reviving the dead. Turning back time. The meaning dawned on Lortel at once. She asked if Glass truly intended to bring someone back from the dead using celestial magic. Then, narrowing her eyes, she asked how long the headmaster had known about this. Instead of answering, he posed his own question. Who did she think Glass wished to revive? The person he revered above all else, the great sage Sylvania, or his own daughter, whose death weighed on him with unbearable guilt? Before Lortel could reply, a staff member rushed in with urgent news. Glass had been sighted heading into the underground waterways, and Taylee had already gone after him. Worse, according to a witness, Glass had taken 2 students hostage, Ayla Triss, a first year, and Ed Rothstaler, a second year. The moment Lortel heard Ed's name, her eyes widened. Then from outside, a low rumble and a bestial roar echoed. She darted to a window, snatching binoculars from someone standing nearby. Through the glass she saw a blazing dragon of fire, Takan, towering over the trees as it advanced toward the waterway entrance. A lone figure stood on its head. Lortel focused the lens until she saw Yenneka, her expression frantic. Declaring that she would rescue Ed as well, Lortel swore she would retrieve the sealed tome herself. The first mini-boss blocking the way was Dorothy, the Academy's top 3rd-year alchemy student. Her skills in combat were remarkable for an alchemist, enough to challenge even those in the combat department. As a first year, Dorothy had blended into the crowd without standing out. But Professor Glass had seen her potential and extended his hand to her. To her, he was a saviour, and she was willing to oppose the school itself for his sake. Now, however, she knelt trembling, unable to face what loomed before her. Staring at the fire dragon and Yenneka standing before her, she stammered that this was too much. Yenneka's expression was cold as she demanded to know where Ed was. Her glare bore into Dorothy, who promptly fainted, collapsing on the ground. Yenneka dismounted from Tarkan, her spirits gathering protectively around her. She asked the dragon to recall the directions it had received from Muggs. With so many twists and turns, she grew flustered trying to remember. Looking down at Dorothy's unconscious form, she realized she had been the one to frighten her into this state. She reached out and quietly covered Dorothy's face. A voice called her name. Yenneka turned to see Lortel approaching with her servants. Lortel's heart skipped a beat at the sight of Dorothy on the ground, and Yenneka kneeling over her, covering her face. For a brief, chilling moment, Lortel imagined Yenneka had killed her outright. She swallowed hard, remembering that Yenneka was counted among Sylvania's strongest combatants, second only to Lucy. If it meant keeping Ed safe, Yenneka would tear the entire academy apart. The thought struck her with sudden dread. If Yenneka rescued Ed, Ed might fall for her. Worse, she imagined them getting married. The very idea made her blurt out a panicked no. Normally cold and calculating, Lortel lost her composure when it came to him. Forcing herself to think, she lied smoothly. She claimed Ed had already been rescued, that he was injured and bedridden, and that he was asking for Yenneka. Yenneka's sharp eyes narrowed. She demanded to know why Lortel would lie about that. She explained that she had come as soon as she found out where Ed was, so how could it be possible that he had already been rescued? For all her absent-minded nature, when it came to Ed, Yenneka's mind worked twice as fast. Caught, Lortel gave a nervous laugh and said she must have been mistaken. Yenneka cut her off, insisting there was no time to waste. They had to find Ed now. Lortel thought quickly. Yenneka hadn't said anything wrong, and there was no reason to oppose her directly. On Yenneka's side, she remembered asking Lucy for help earlier, only for Lucy to yawn and wander off for a walk. She might actually need Lortel's cooperation now. The two girls exchanged a tense stare before agreeing this wasn't the time to get in each other's way. Lortel told her staff to remain behind. It was too dangerous for them. Together, she and Yenneka decided to split their efforts, one searching the eastern side and the other the west. Then they sprinted off in opposite directions, each determined to be the one who found Ed first. Back in the library, Ed faced Raina just after the earthquake struck. The shelves trembled, dust rained from the ceiling, and the ghostly guardian's scream echoed as she glided toward him. He glanced upward as cracks split across the stone overhead. Then, with a thunderous crash, the ceiling gave way. Rubble collapsed directly onto Raina, burying her beneath broken stone and wood. Ed shielded his face from the dust, coughing as he tried to make out what had happened. Through the settling haze, he spotted a small figure perched casually atop the wreckage. Lucy sat on the rubble, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She looked at Ed with her usual drowsy indifference, then yawned. In a sluggish voice, she said she had been bored, so she came to rescue him. On the roof of the academy, the principal stood overlooking the school grounds. Another man stood beside him, watching in silence. The man asked if it was really acceptable to let the incident continue unchecked. The principal replied that while it was dangerous, it was also a rare opportunity for the students to grow stronger. The man pressed him, saying the academy was already experiencing a golden age. Every year might see one exceptional student, but now they had several rising stars all at once. Was this level of danger truly necessary? The principal's gaze stayed fixed on the view before him. He admitted that might be so, but he had a feeling of what was to come. For that, the students would need to become even stronger. Back in the underground waterways, Lucy's wide eyes fixed on Ed as she asked if he had any jerky. Ed put a hand to his head, exasperated. Did she really think he would? Disappointed, Lucy floated away, saying she would just find somewhere to nap. Ed stopped her immediately. He thought to himself that Yenneka and Lortel must have already entered the waterways by now, searching for him. He needed to stop them before they reached Glast. Taylee should manage, especially with one less mini-boss to deal with, now that Raina was no longer a threat. The real problem was Lucy. If she ran into Glass directly, events would tilt toward the bad ending. He had to keep her close. He told her to stay with him. She asked why. He answered that she was strong and he would feel safer with her by his side. Her eyes narrowed again. Was he absolutely sure he didn't have any jerky? He told her no, and asked her to forget about it. What he needed was for her to do him a favour, stay with him until he made it out of the underground waterways. Lucy replied that she could just use magic to take him out now. But Ed shook his head. He had something he needed to do first. She thought it over for a moment, then agreed, but only in exchange for a favour of her own. A little later, Ed sprinted down the halls with Lucy fast asleep on his back. Of all things, the favour she'd asked for was to be carried while she napped. As he ran, he decided he would only take the bare minimum of magical items he needed. His real focus was on finding Yenneka and Lortel before they complicated things further. Meanwhile, Lortel moved quickly through the waterways in search of Ed. She sensed faint traces of concealing magic nearby. Her talent in magic resonance, something even Professor Glass had acknowledged, allowed her to navigate the labyrinth with ease. Unlike Yenneka, who excelled in spirit magic, Lortel's specialty let her move faster and more decisively. Something stirred within her as she pressed forward. For once, she wasn't being driven by profit. Instead, she was moving for someone else. The realization made her heart pound, just as it had that night in Ophelis Hall. Suddenly, the wall beside her exploded outward. Shielding her face from the debris, she looked up to see Ed stepping through the dust, his coat weighed down with magical items and Lucy fast asleep on his back. He greeted her calmly, saying he was glad she was there, that he had been kidnapped. Then he asked her to help carry some of the items he was holding. Lortel froze, struck speechless at the sight of him. Without a word, she took the items automatically, only realizing moments later how flustered she had become. Shaking her head, she snapped herself back to her senses and demanded to know, wasn't he in danger? Ed admitted he had been, but glanced back at Lucy resting on his shoulders and said it had all worked out. Lortel's eyes narrowed. How could he carry another girl so casually, as though it meant nothing? Before she could dwell on it, Ed was already asking her to sort through some scrolls. If she had any of the ingredients he needed, he said he would gladly purchase them. Her frustration boiled over. She shouted his name in anger. Ed leaned closer, making her freeze at the sudden closeness. He told her she was the only one he could trust with this. Her heart thudded harder in her chest. She wanted to resist, not to let herself be taken advantage of, but the moment he added that he was grateful for her help, her resolve melted away. She gave in with a bright smile, agreeing without hesitation. Then a voice called out to her. Lortel looked down the hall to see one of her assistants out of breath. He ran up and told her something terrible had happened. At the same time, Taylee pushed forward with his group, Clevius, Elvira, Ziggs, and Adele, making their way toward Ayla. Adele, gifted with foresight, warned them that she sensed something ahead. Their opponent would be formidable. She pointed toward the left passage of 2 possible routes. Before anyone could move, the wall of that passage exploded outward. Takan burst through, flames blazing, carrying Cleo dangling helplessly from its mouth by the back of her shirt. Flailing in panic, she cried out apologies, insisting she had only acted on a whim and begged to be spared. Takan dropped her unceremoniously to the ground, where she fainted on the spot. Yenneka stepped forward with a calm sigh, remarking that perhaps they had taken another wrong turn. Then she looked at Taylee's group and smiled, greeting them warmly. Taylee and Elvira immediately fell into defensive stances, tension rippling through them. Ziggs, however, simply waved back, unconcerned. But Taylee and Elvira remembered well the sense of dread from the Ophelis Hall incident. Facing Yenneka again now was enough to make their nerves fray. As they braced for combat, Yenneka tilted her head in confusion, wondering why they seemed angry with her. Ziggs tried to hold Taylee back, telling him to calm down, but Taylee refused to relax his guard. Just then, a voice echoed from the other passage. Ed emerged with Lortel at his side, telling them to stop. Yenneka's eyes lit up. She rushed to him, cupping his cheeks with both hands and asking if he was all right. Elvira's jaw tightened. She leaned closer to Taylee, whispering that now their situation had worsened. If Ed was here, allied with both Yenneka and Lortel, there was no chance they could overcome him. They had barely defeated him at Ophelia's Hall. Ed stepped toward Taylee. Placing a firm hand on his shoulder, he told him that Ayla was waiting for him and that he should go stop Glast. Taylee stood silent, staring at him in surprise. Without another word, Ed ran past Lucy, still asleep on his back, and headed for the exit. He thought to himself that it was time for everyone to play their part. Taylee's group would handle Glast. As for him, he needed to deal with the unexpected variable. It was time to take down Elte. One of Lortel's employees had reported news they had all known was inevitable. The mercenaries hired by Elte had reached Akan Island. In the original story, Elte had been thoroughly defeated and never had the chance to stage a comeback. But this time, he had been ousted earlier than planned. He had fled, regrouped, and prepared his revenge. Ed knew Elte was supposed to be the mid-boss of Act 2. If he could eliminate him now, the story would still follow its proper course. He had to take him down here. As he passed Taylee's group, Ed called out to Ziggs. If Ziggs followed the path Ed had come from, it would be mostly clear and lead them straight to Ayla. She would fill them in once she was safe. Then he turned to Taylee, pausing briefly before wishing him luck. With that, Ed, Lortel and Yenneka set off, joined by one of Lortel's staff. As they ran, Lortel filled Ed in on the situation with Elte. Ed said they should try to warn the staff members as soon as possible. Yenneka stopped him, telling him to wait. When he dismissed her, insisting they had to hurry, she raised her voice in anger. He was still not fully recovered from collapsing. How could he think of fighting Elte now? Tears welled in her eyes as she begged him not to get involved. This was Lortel's company's business, not his. She didn't want to see him hurt anymore. Ed hesitated. She was right. He had no reason to involve himself. But for the sake of the story, Elte had to be removed, but he couldn't tell her that. Before he could reply, Lortel surprised him by siding with Yenneka. She admitted that involving Ed would be selfish of her, and told him to go home and recover. The two nodded at each other in agreement, leaving Ed stunned. They were actually getting along, but he couldn't just leave. Ed thanked Yenneka for worrying about him, but insisted he didn't agree that this had nothing to do with him. Yenneka blinked at him, flustered, and asked what he meant by that. Lortel, on the other hand, blushed at the thought that Ed was taking her side. Ed brushed past it, telling them there was no time to explain. They had to keep moving. Yenneka frowned, suspicious. Nervously, she asked if he had some kind of contract with Lortel. Was that why he was helping her? Ed nodded, saying he needed the magical engineering items. Lortel only smiled, her cheeks warming further. They reached Dorothy, still unconscious where she had fallen. Ed commented that Taylee had gone a little too far against his upperclassmen. Yenneka knelt beside Dorothy, checking her condition. Guilt overcame her, and she burst into tears, insisting she hadn't meant to hurt her so badly. Through sobs, she asked Ed not to think poorly of her. The group pressed on until they reached the exit. Lortel assured Ed that the carriage she had arrived in should be waiting just outside. But when they stepped out into the open air, the carriage lay wrecked and her staff were sprawled unconscious on the ground. Elte stood waiting. Lortel gulped, admitting he had arrived faster than she expected. Elte sneered, saying that just as he had taught her, she had tried to erase every trace of her plot to remove him from the company. But her employees were weak. With the slightest threat, they had betrayed her and brought her here. The staff member who had accompanied them stepped to Elte's side, bowing in apology. Lortel smiled, trying to hide her hurt, but Elte knew that practiced expression all too well. He told her it was a shame. The only proof he could obtain now would have to be tortured out of her. Snapping his fingers, he signalled the unconscious staff. They leapt to their feet, drawing blades and surrounding the group. One lunged at Ed, but Lortel intercepted with her magic. She asked how he dared bring mercenaries onto school grounds. Elta only laughed, boasting that he had brought the strongest mercenaries on the continent. More emerged from behind the trees, archers knocking arrows while others advanced with swords. He ordered them to keep Lortel alive, but kill the rest. Arrows rained down. Yenneka swept her hand through the air, wind magic bursting outward to deflect them all. Ed thanked her. Elty frowned. Elementalist was such a nuisance. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out a scroll. Ed's eyes widened. He recognised it instantly. Valara's Prejudice, a spell that restricted all mana within its range for 10 minutes. It was a superior version of Elvira's Night Butterfly reagent and probably cost a fortune to acquire. The only drawback was its slow activation time, but with all these mercenaries protecting him, that wouldn't matter. And if it went off, they were finished. Every one of them relied on magic. Lortel voiced the same thought. They couldn't let Elta finish that scroll, or it was over. Ed shouted at Elta, asking how he thought he could get away with this. Could he handle the consequences? Elta laughed bitterly, saying it was still better than losing his life. Ed understood. At his core, Elta was only trying to survive, just like him. But he couldn't let him win, not for his own selfish reasons. Ed lowered Lucy gently to the ground and told her it was time to wake up. Lucy yawned, rubbing her eyes, asking why it was so noisy. Then, whoosh! Her magic erupted outward in a single pulse, raw and overwhelming. The mercenaries flinched instinctively, staggering back under its weight. Lazy Lucy has awakened.